By 1816, the United States was barely holding together. The capital was still recovering from being sacked and burned by the British 2 years earlier. Partisan divisions were running high, and the original generation of American revolutionaries was rapidly dying out. Into this vacuum stepped James Monroe. When he took the oath of office as the 5th president, he became the absolute last of the founding fathers to lead the nation. His credibility with the American public was rooted in physical sacrifice. As a teenager, he dropped out of the College of William and Mary to join the Continental Army, where he fought and bled on the battlefield at Trenton. Surviving that harsh winter encampment and the brutal realities of the Revolutionary War gave him a singular, lifelong focus, ensuring the fragile republic he fought to create would actually survive. Monroe spent the next 4 decades proving his capability. He climbed the political ladder from the Virginia legislature to the Continental Congress and eventually crossed the Atlantic to serve as a diplomat representing American interests across Europe. This is the 1803 treaty finalizing the Louisiana Purchase. During Thomas Jefferson's administration, Monroe traveled to Paris to co-negotiate this exact document, instantly doubling the physical size of the United States. When the War of 1812 broke out, his executive endurance was tested again. He became the only person in American history to serve as both Secretary of State and Secretary of War at the exact same time. Stepping into the presidency in 1817 presented a different kind of challenge. The immediate question was whether this veteran statesman could govern a rapidly expanding, highly polarized country without it fracturing from within. His extensive resume served as a decades-long training ground. He had evaluated the nation from the battlefield, the diplomatic table, and the cabinet room, preparing him to manage a republic constantly teetering on the edge of collapse. Monroe immediately set out to reduce the political toxicity in Washington. He made the highly unusual decision to largely ignore rigid party lines when appointing his cabinet, effectively forcing rival factions to cooperate. He also took the executive branch directly to the people. Between 1817 and 1819, Monroe embarked on 3 extensive, highly visible regional tours, traveling through the northern, southern, and western states. These efforts essentially dissolved the Federalist Party as a national institution. Partisan conflict dropped to such a remarkable low that his presidency became universally known as the era of good feelings. By leveraging his massive popularity and physically showing up in diverse communities, Monroe managed to manufacture a cohesive national identity out of post-war division. The political harmony was tested almost immediately. The nation was hit by the Panic of 1819, America's first major catastrophic economic recession. A far deadlier threat emerged with the Missouri crisis. As territories applied for statehood, an explosive debate over the westward expansion of slavery threatened to split the Union entirely. Monroe himself embodied the nation's deepest contradiction. He was a lifelong Virginia planter who personally enslaved 178 people, deeply embedding him in the exact economic system that was threatening to tear the country apart. This 1820 map illustrates the Missouri Compromise. To prevent civil war, Monroe signed legislation balancing Maine as a free state and Missouri as a slave state. At Missouri's lower boundary sits the 36-degree 30-minute parallel. Slavery was strictly prohibited in remaining territories north of this border. While managing these internal fractures, he continued to expand and secure the nation's perimeter, working with Secretary of State John Quincy Adams to acquire Florida from Spain through the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819. Monroe's domestic agenda was ultimately driven by cold, calculated pragmatism. He accepted deeply flawed temporary legislative deals because his overriding priority was keeping the young republic intact. By 1823, a massive external threat was brewing. Following a wave of independence movements in Latin America, European empires, specifically Spain and France, began actively scheming to recolonize the newly formed nations to the south. At the exact same time, Russia was steadily expanding its territorial presence, moving southward from Alaska toward the Oregon Territory. This handwritten letter from October 1823 shows Monroe weighing his options. He discusses the aggressive designs of the European alliance and an offer from Great Britain proposing a joint cooperation with the U.S. to counter the other empires. The United States suddenly found itself boxed in by expanding foreign powers. Monroe had to decide whether to submit to British diplomatic influence or take a radical, independent stand on the world stage. Monroe chose independence. In his December 1823 address to Congress, he delivered a masterstroke drafted alongside John Quincy Adams, known today as the Monroe Doctrine. The doctrine established 3 strict pillars for American foreign policy: separate spheres of influence for the Americas and Europe, strict non-colonization of the Western Hemisphere, and non-intervention by European powers in independent American states. It was a remarkably bold declaration. A former colony, still in the process of rebuilding its own capital, was openly closing half the globe to centuries-old European imperialism. The American public rewarded his steadfast leadership. When he ran for re-election in 1820, he did so completely unopposed, securing all but one single dissenting electoral college vote. Over his 2 terms, Monroe bridged the perilous gap between a vulnerable, fractured string of post-war colonies and a confident, rapidly growing continental power. His lifelong devotion to the American experiment ensured the Republic survived its turbulent early decades. In the process, he drew the exact geopolitical boundaries that continue to define United States sovereignty today.